Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. Today, my friends are none other than moving medicine forwards, Dr. Michael Klaper and Dr. Zach Burns. And today they'll be discussing the Diet Derby. Please welcome them back to the show. I love that name, Diet Derby. Sounds like a race.
Indeed, it
Wow.
is a race in many ways to get people's attention in their favor and to ascribe to a particular way of eating. And there's a lot of competition, it seems. So we'll look at the individual competitors in that derby.
I
Uh,
can't wait because, people like, show me the evidence.
right.
It's funny
Yeah.
because are you familiar with that list? I think it's US News and World Report that rates diets every year.
Oh, right. Yes.
And one of the diets that always comes in number one or number two, even though it is not vegan, it is pretty plant-based. And it's Dr. Barbara Rolls from Penn State University, Volumetrics, because it's based in calorie density with lots and lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, those kind of things.
Yes, they still don't have the courage to talk about an animal-free diet, and we'll be,
Absolutely. Yeah,
but we'll be. We have that courage. We will
yeah,
be talking about things like that during the course of the hour.
absolutely. Well, I can't wait to hear your take on it. We know what the least healthy is. You know what always comes in the bottom of that list? The things like keto.
Yeah, we'll get there. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to this.
So it's great to be back on the show, Chef AJ. Thanks again for having us. And we wanted to go through the various diets from very plant-based to not plant-based at all, and everything in between, or most things in between, because there's a lot of confusion out there. Some of it's natural because there's more and more body of scientific evidence and there's discussion and everything. And some of the confusion, I think, is engineered by the industries that want us to keep eating their way. So we want to break it down for you. And I would start by, we're going to start with, because people are pretty familiar, Dr. Clapper and I usually always really advocate for the whole plant food diet. So Dr. Clapper, could you just introduce us to the principles of that style of eating?
Okay, well, if everybody can see the slide I just put up there about the competitors in the Diet Derby here, we're going to be talking about 8 of them, going from the least flesh containing to the most. Yes, we'll start with the whole food plant-based diet. And the diet is not problematic for me or most people following it, but the name seems to be. Dr. Burns and I were just at a wonderful conference, the Plant Nutrition Project's annual meeting in Southern California. And the lead speaker there was Dr. Joel Fuhrman. And he talked about his nutritarian diet. And he immediately pointed out the issue that I'm speaking about right now, and that's the term whole food plant-based, which he does not feel comfortable with. And there's reason for that, because he said quite rightly, the American diet is basically 70% plant material. Of course, those plants are French fries and ketchup and Oreo cookies, a bunch of refined sugar and all the oils and all the fats, the coconut oil, etc. It's all plant-based. So you can make a really unhealthy diet. They're not whole foods, however, which is an important concept here. But as we're going to be talking about on the next choice, the ethical vegan there. If you just say vegan diet, that also opens the door to lots of processed foods, etc. So we're back at whole food plant-based. So it's the most comfortable one, it seems, for most of us in the nutrition biz these days. And we're talking about a food stream made of whole plant foods, grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, etc. Free of animal products, meat, dairy, fish, etc. And a minimum underlined 3 times processed foods. Bread is a processed food, I suppose. You do grind the wheat, etc. But if it's whole grain, etc., there's soft margins around the definition there. But by and large, it's whole plant foods with minimally processed additions to it. And it's been around for centuries, and people thrive on it, and people know my bias towards it for all sorts of reasons. Its health benefits, It stops the slaughter of these innocent animals and the destruction of the planet, which are getting to be more and more and more major reasons to adopt a whole food plant-based diet. So, that's why it's number one here. Are there problems with it? Yes, some people, it's a high fiber diet, and some people, as they make the transition, their microbiome lags a little bit, being able to deal with all the plant fiber, and so they complain of gas and bloating, etc. That passes as time goes on. The legumes, the beans, and etc. Some folks have gas problems with that, etc. But again, you introduce those slowly, a tablespoon at a time, over the course of weeks, and let your microbiome adapt to it. There are ways to deal with these complaints here. And social issues that you feel like the odd man out at the restaurant if your friends are all omnivores, etc. Now, those are the main issues. But as far as your body goes, we are plant-eating hominids, just like our gorilla cousins. And there's plenty of protein and vitamins and minerals that should provide all we need for a healthy human body. Um, with that, I'm sorry, I'm going on here a bit, but it finally raises, and Dr. Furman was honest about this as well. When you pull meat out of the diet, you are pulling out a significant source of vitamin B12, of iron, of zinc, and some essential fat, DHA and EPA, that the animal stores in the muscles there. And so in order to make sure that you don't run into a deficit over the long term, I think supplements are appropriate on a whole food plant-based diet. Everyone agrees vitamin B12 is essential if we're not eating animal products. Not that the animals make them, but it comes from the microbes in the natural world there. But in today's world of modern sanitation and chlorinated drinking water, we don't have those natural sources any longer. And the vitamin D, we're spending time inside. It's not really a problem with the diet, but it doesn't hurt to supplement vitamin D. The zinc, it's in the beans and grains, but if you're not eating lots of those, then taking a supplement, I think, that has low dose of D and B12 and zinc, and we can talk about the DHA. Makes sense. And for people who wag their finger, well, that is not a natural diet. Nothing is natural these days. The foods that you buy in the supermarket that our Paleolithic ancestors wouldn't recognize, the fruits and vegetables, etc. We're all living unnatural lives. And given the ecological imperative to let this earth heal, if going to a plant-based diet and taking a vitamin supplement a couple times a week lets the earth heal, lets the animals out of the slaughterhouse, lets the forest come back and reverse global warming. Take the supplement. It really is not worth making an ethical stand, or it's more of a rhetorical stand at this point. So
Dr. Klaper,
go ahead.
if I heard you correctly, you presented a few barriers, but also how we can overcome them. So with socially, people might struggle at first if they make this transition. It can be awkward at the restaurant, and you've spoken elsewhere about different strategies to overcome that. You really can, and ultimately, it's not, as you say, it's really only your business what you're eating, and if you have mature friends who love you unconditionally, they're going to be okay, regardless of what you select on the menu. And then the gas issue, yes, introducing more fiber and legumes could initially give people a little gastrointestinal distress. Not everyone, but we have lots of strategies for that. We've talked elsewhere about cooking things very completely, especially things like kidney beans, skimming the foam off the top of the pot if there's some foam. Some of those carbohydrates are the ones that our gut microbiome hasn't yet evolved to digest, right? Until we start to eat more of those foods. And then finally, the nutrient issue. Yeah, you may have to take a couple vitamin supplements. And as we'll see today, it'll be well worth it compared to, the litany of medications that people often have to eat because of a different eating style. So the medications people have to take because of the diseases that they've developed. So one more question about a whole plant food eating pattern is, can it accommodate ethnic cuisine? Because a lot of people worry, well, I can't retain the traditional flavors uh, and the feeling of the foods of my culture. Can you do that on a whole plant food diet?
Oh, wonderful question. And absolutely the answer is gloriously yes. And part of the answer was in your question when you talked about the flavors, and because that's really what people are focused on. It's not really the protein content of Indian food, et cetera. It's the flavors that we're looking for. And you absolutely can take any ethnic cuisine. In fact, the great ethnic cuisines of the world, all of them have a long history of plant-strong main dishes, the Latin American, Mexican, etc., the tamales and the tacos, etc. There are ways to make rice and beans and corn takes better, and you can certainly do that with all sorts of wonderful salsas and flavorings. As I mentioned, the Indian curries are, it's the spices, it's the turmeric and the coriander, etc. Whether or not there's chicken flesh in there, it's the flavor that makes it Indian food, and that gives it that Indian flavor. And if you're a fan of Asian food, all the wonderful noodle and vegetable dishes there, again, you certainly can have them completely plant-based. Around the world, these cuisines already exist. And much to their credit, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Furman, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Greger, all of them are a steady river of recipes for exactly this issue here, and to take plant-based foods and make them so satisfying and delicious with ethnic flavors introduced during the cooking. So absolutely, you can satisfy any desire for ethnic cuisines with a completely plant-based meal planning. So yes, eat your heart's content, and you will hurt your heart.
Really important thing for us to relay to our patients is that this does not have to be a sacrifice or a cultural, sacrifice, like you're going to assimilate you can really retain any culture, but tailor the recipes a little bit to what the body is asking for. So shall we transition to ethical vegan?
Indeed.
Okay. Going
Questions?
down the list. And by
Yeah.
the way, this is the diet derby, right? I don't think either of us supports horse racing, but we'll call it the diet derby. And what was interesting, as a side note, in the Summer Olympics, was there was lots of discussion about the treatment of the horses. I don't know if there was ever as much consciousness about the experience of actual horses as there was this time around. So maybe that's a sign of the times. But Dr. Klaper, when you went vegan in the 80s, I think, what kind of vegan food was available in shops and restaurants?
Oh my, 1981. Oh boy, it was bleak back then. Though it kind of forced us under combat conditions to make rice and beans and greens and potatoes taste good, and it's not hard to do. And there were still salsas and miso and toppings and nutritional yeast still existed back then. So it certainly was doable back then. But you walked into a natural food store there, it looked nothing like today's uh, Whole Foods, etc. And when if you wanted to buy soy milk, you bought a bag or a box of powder, soy powder, and you put a few tablespoons into a pitcher of cold water and stirred it up. And it was the flattest, bleakest liquid imaginable, unpleasant to drink. It made a lot of water drinkers. And And the vast array of food and meat substitutes, et cetera, didn't even exist. How we celebrated in 1985 or six, I think, when tofuti ice cream came out. Oh boy, we get ice cream back again. It was dreadful stuff, really sweet and oily, but that's how desperate we were back then. That much those of us who had recently transitioned missed the old foods there. But all that has evolved into something quite different with positive and negative effects as well, which we could talk about there. But things have certainly changed in the last 40 years that I've been vegan for sure.
Did you ever have imagined at the time all these different substitutes? And did you worry? Do you remember being afraid, given what you do, that these foods would become ultra processed?
Never crossed my mind back then. There were no veggie burgers. You made your own. It was a patty of rice and beans that just fell apart on the piece of bread there, and so no, we couldn't conceive of. I had never seen a veggie hot dog or none of those, and so no, we were quite innocent back then, and no idea what it would evolve into, and. Which brings us around to our competitor number two here, ethical vegans. And these are folks who are vegan for the animals. And my heart goes out to them, yay. And bless you for having that part of your heart awakened and you're acting on it. And that's a hopeful sign for us all. But these folks are often very young and not terribly nutritionally literate at that point. All that matters is that there are no animal products in what they are eating, and fair enough. But welcome to the 21st century, as Dr. Burns was just implying. You walk into the Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or whatever, and you are assaulted by cooler full, shelf full, barrel full of foods that are tasty. They certainly are. When you bite into the burgers and the bun and the hot dogs, you get that mouthfeel that's very reminiscent of those foods, those comfort foods we grew up with. But if you really, as we're told, don't believe anything on the front of the label. If you turn the label over and have a look at what's really in that particular cereal or soy milk or whatever, as Jeff Novick says, don't ever believe anything on the front of a nutritional label. Look on the back. You see, ingredient after ingredient of salts and sugars and oils and flavorings and methyl cellulose and emulsifiers and TVPs, etc. And each of these ingredients are maybe not harmful in themselves, but one of the standards I always bring to a discussion like this is the title of and the meaning of Dr. Colin Campbell's book, Whole, WHOLE. And he says, don't fixate on this particular nutrient or that particular additive, whatever. It's the whole food stream moving through the body day after day, flowing through your liver, changing your microbiome, that really makes a difference. And if that whole food stream is overwhelmingly whole food, plant-based, it's overwhelmingly whole grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables, etc. If that's the carrier stream, they used to say in anesthesia, then if once a month the occasional veggie burger goes in there, I don't think you're running a great risk. But ethical vegans, in their zeal to help the animals, etc., and many of them, they don't have much in the way of resources, etc. It's easier to buy, pick up that pack of veggie burgers, whatever, and their whole food stream is largely processed food. And you wonder what all that salt and oil and sugars and methyl cellulose is doing to their gut flora, is doing to their artery walls over time. And so for that reason, the plea is to our ethical vegan friends, Get as many whole plant foods in as you possibly can. And if money is an issue, remember, because people often say after one of my lectures, well, this is elitist eating. You know, my clients live in a food desert. But again, rice and beans are cheap. You know, potatoes are cheap. The staple foods that provide the majority of calories, the carbohydrates and the protein. These are whole plant foods rich in them, and they're inexpensive. You can buy bags of rice and beans and lentils, etc., for just a few dollars and eat for a month, less than $20 for a whole month's worth of rice and beans, etc. So again, don't let the money argument put off our ethical vegan friends, but come back to the to where we really came from, for those whole plant foods that they call it peasant food for a reason. One, the peasants can afford it because it's cheap, and second, they load up on rice and beans and go out in the field and work all day because of the energy and the protein that these whole plant foods provide there. So for our ethical vegan folks, don't eat everything out of package and that's been devitalized and processed. It's not helping you or the animals in the long run.
This is a difficult area for us advocating whole plant food diets because we also, I personally started for the animals, and I was one of these ethical vegans at first. I grew up with some good nutrition principles, and so I wasn't eating like crazy, like the whole packs of Oreos and everything, but I certainly was not strict the way I am now. And so I think that's maybe part of a lot of people's transition, but I think it is incumbent on us to provide this education to people. I recently started at a new clinic in primary care, and there are young people who are vegan. I meet people, they happen to be vegan. They're rarely whole food plant-based. So it's on us in the medical community, and other leaders in the vegan movement. I think we have to impart the importance of a clean vegan diet, one that's minimally processed, because then the movement succeeds. Otherwise, if the movement becomes full of people with medical issues, then we won't succeed. And as you say, Dr. Klaper, that's disadvantageous to the cause of the animals and the earth. So that's that one. What about number 3?
Here's Dr. Furman's Nutritarian Diet. He coined this word, and fascinating word. And I love Joel Furman. He's a brave man. He's an excellent physician. He's a formidable researcher, a good scientist. And he's one of my mentors. I've learned a ton from Dr. Furman, and I so appreciate his work and his concepts he's trying to share here in a Nutritarian diet. And he's saying that, yes, food provides all sorts of sensual gratifications and social import when you're eating with your family, etc. But as far as what your body really is looking for, every mouthful of food that goes down into your tummy there should bring good things, should bring calories that you can burn and whole carbohydrates, a significant amount of protein that the legumes, beans, peas, chickpeas, lentils, whole grains will bring, and vitamins and minerals that are in the fresh green and yellow vegetables and the fruits, etc., and fiber, which all whole plant foods have. And calorie for calorie, the more of these other nutrients, more vitamins, minerals, fiber, protein that an individual mouthful of beans or kale can bring in, the higher their nutritarian score, if you will. And he kind of sets the gold standard or the green standard for when I'm trying to put a meal together. You want those high nutrient value foods in there. You want the legumes, the beans and the greens, or as Dr. Furman has given us the acronym of G-BOMBs there. You want green vegetables, berries, onions, G, B, O, M is for mushrooms. B is for beans and S is for seeds. And yeah, you want those in abundance in every meal there. And that package is going to give you, just a high quality food stream. That whole food stream is going to be very beneficial. Are there negatives? A couple things that I hear my nutritional or medical colleagues wag their tongues about. One, it can be socially difficult when you're out at the restaurant there. If you really want to order with a nutritarian bent to your food orders there, the local Italian restaurant that you're in may not have yeah, you're going to get, pasta and oil, etc. Restaurant food is restaurant food there, and the strict nutritarian is probably not going to be happy in that scene. Um, it's a fairly low, it's a low fat and low nutrient density. He's not opposed to avocados, etc. Sure, as opposed to oils for good reasons. They are not friendly to the body. But some folks, because it's such a low calorie density diet, some folks lose a lot of weight and have a hard time keeping that weight on. Salads and greens are wonderful, but they don't supply a whole lot of carbohydrates and fats to help you keep the weight on there. Um, and like Dr. Furman says, the main nutrients that may need to be supplemented, B12 for sure, zinc, vitamin D, again, not a nutritional deficiency, but it should be consumed. And calcium, again, those greens are really important for that. But in many of the vegan multivitamins, they have B12D, a little calcium, a little zinc. Iodine for your thyroid is important, and he's all for supplementing a little bit of that. And then there's the omega-3 question. He feels strongly that some vegans can, over the long term, be deficient in EPA and DHA, these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, that may increase their risk for dementia or decreased mental abilities in advanced age. Not been proven, but he strongly believes that. It's a hard thing to prove. Nobody's followed people for years and years. All of these nutritional studies that, again, my colleagues say, well, you don't have long-term follow-up, etc. But again, these studies are so difficult to perform and to fund. You'd have to take people almost from birth and put them one on a Furman-style diet for 70 years, and one on a McDougall-style diet for 70 years, and one on a Flexitarian diet for 70 years. And at the end of 70 years, see who's got the heart attacks, who has the strokes, who's still alive, who's not. And nobody's going to do those studies. Human beings, it can't be a double-blind study. They know what they're eating. They talk to each other. They change their diet. They eat different combinations of foods. And who's going to fund this? Big broccoli, they just don't have that kind of nutritional interest. Can't make money off of them. So those folks who say, show me 15 double-blind placebo-controlled studies showing it's better, we can't produce that kind of evidence. But as far as the general principles of a diet that delivers lots of macronutrients, the calories and protein, and the micronutrients, Dr. Furman's diet certainly does that. But again, it's more the social and psychological issue. It's a restrictive diet, if you will, but all your other friends are eating meat and dairy and oils, and it's okay to restrict those foods. So that's not really a problem. And the fiber issue there, but again, easy does it. And those difficulties usually resolve over time. So 2 thumbs up for the nutritarian diet if you can maintain it over time. And then that's the question, whether people maintain it and fall off the wagon. But if you fall off the wagon, then get back on. It's okay. Dr. Furman will not appear in a puff of smoke and slap your wrist. Fresh start the next morning, so you can get back on the wagon.
Dr. Klaper, something I want to clarify is is this really much more nutrient density than you would consume on a proper whole plant food diet? I mean, what's the difference in terms of nutrient density?
Yeah, they're pretty close. Dr. Furman would say, don't eat white potatoes. They're mostly just starch and don't supply the kind of nutrients that you need. All flour products he's not a fan of. So pastas and most breads, and where those can be consumed in moderation on the classic whole food plant-based vegan style diet. Dr. Furman is really, one note samba there as far as whole plant foods, and he really wants us to stay away from foods that deliver mostly starches, and so it's a subtle difference. A really well done nutritarian diet is and a well done whole food plant-based diet. They're pretty congruent, but if you want to have the occasional, I have the occasional baked potato, and again, that goes to Dr. Furman doesn't appear to slap my wrist when I'm reaching for
Which is a good segue into the Dr. McDougall starch-based diet. Can you describe the basic principles there?
Right. Dr. McDougall was trying to give us the same message. Whole plant foods are the natural foods for Homo sapien human beings, and this, and here's another place where the language doesn't really serve us like it could or should. Starch based, it conjures up boxes of laundry starch added to superware. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's saying that all the great civilizations around the world throughout history were able to sustain themselves because the majority of their calories came from whole plant foods that delivered carbohydrates in the form of starches in their whole form. The Aztecs and the Maya Central America ate corn. And corn has protein, but there is starch where the calories are stored. But it's the whole corn, not the starch out of the corn, that's the issue, and that's what McDougall is saying. The Incas in South America were potato based, and that provided their starches. And in the Middle East, it was barley and these whole grains. Again, so there is starch in a grain of barley, but so there's protein and there's fiber and there's vitamins and minerals. But focused on the starch that's in the plant, it makes you think that it's completely just the starch is the issue. And people say, no, it's the starch-rich whole plant foods that you should be eating, but it just morphed into starch-based. And that has led some people astray. I think it's a great diet, but people, they want to grab onto one concept, and due to the labeling, it's starch. So the more potatoes you eat, the better. The more starch you eat, the better. And so the more pasta, more bread, more potatoes, etc. Because there's got starch, which is just stored carbohydrates. Well, I don't think that's what Dr. McDougall wanted, and that's not really the idea. And when you eat that much starch there, you wonder, what are you really doing to your, especially if they're refined starches, if they're flour products, etc. What kind of microbes are you spawning in your gut? The same issues, you still could use some vitamins and minerals, zinc and iodine and calcium, etc. It's a very low fat diet. So are you absorbing all your fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K? Dr. McDougall was certainly not a fan of oils, but even avocados, etc., where on a whole food plant-based diet, that's not a big problem as far as moderate amounts of higher fat foods. It's a lower protein intake diet. That's fine, actually. Again, high fiber, etc. So it's a good diet. Just don't go overboard on the starches. It's not the starch itself doesn't have the magic. It's the whole plant food that's rich in starches that has that. It's the corn, it's the beans, it's the potatoes, it's the quinoa, it's the barley, it's the whole plant food, not the starch, the carbohydrates that they contain per se. So again, they're number 1, 3, and 4 in this list here are really neck and neck in the derby there, so to speak. And whichever one you're following, if you don't go way overboard on and being so rigid in following the basic tenets, if you're gentle with yourself, if you're on a ferment diet, if you have the occasional baked potato, I don't think you're causing yourself any nutritional risk by doing that. And the same with the McDougall and the starch-based diet. If you want to have the occasional avocado slice on your salad, I don't think there's a problem with that either. Food should not be eating should not be an anxiety-producing event. It should be a joyful way to nourish your body and your soul and your spirit. And so take these as guides as you're putting your individual meals together, but don't lose the enjoyment of making and eating these wonderful plant-based foods.
Indeed. And as we talk about starch, I am reminded of what I think is one of the greater tragedies in modern healthcare, and there are a few, but that we do not differentiate for patients between complex and refined carbohydrates. So we, generally, we basically make a blanket statement about carbohydrates, and it's usually negative. We say, limit your carbs, watch out for those carbs. So then patients are led to believe that carbohydrates are universally unhealthy, which I think is so misleading and this is where our counseling around diabetes goes astray and I think is really harmful. I think our listeners are familiar basically with the difference between complex and refined carbohydrates, but I wanted to ask you, Dr. Klaper, what between those two, how do they impact the development of advanced glycation end products?
Oh, very important question, Dr. Burns. Okay, so let's go back to that kernel of corn. The outer hull, what you see in the toilet the next morning, that's a carbohydrate. And you need that. You need that fiber. So here's a carb that's quite beneficial. The fiber of the celery stalk, the carrots. These are carbohydrates that are good for us. We need that. We need that fiber. Now, if you take off penetrate further in, you run into the white starchy endosperm of the kernel of corn. And yes, they're carbohydrates. Those are sugars the corn plant has made out of carbon dioxide from the air and water from the rain and sunlight, put it together and created these sugar molecules, and then linked them all together, and that's what the starch is. And so there's stored sugar for the corn plant. That's a seed for the next generation of corn plants. When that kernel of corn goes in the soil and sprouts, it uses that stored energy to send up the green shoot and turn into another corn plant. But that carbohydrate, again, when we eat it, first of all, it's still in its whole form. It's all linked together, so it's absorbed very slowly. And that also is interlaced with protein in there. Zein and other corn proteins are in that white starchy material that you also get when you chew up the corn on the cob, etc. And the vitamins and minerals are also interspersed in that whole kernel of corn, and they're all basically carbohydrates except for the vitamins and minerals. But that's why we want you to eat that, to get the fiber, to get the starch, to get the protein, etc., in that quote starch food there. But when you send that corn to the miller and they just take that in there and they dissolve it in water and they heat it and they extract, etc., and you wind up with just white pure cornstarch. You don't want to be eating that. That does leap into the bloodstream, spikes your insulin, etc. That's processed carbohydrates. And the same thing in the sugarcane plant. You turn that into white sugar and make cookies out of it. plant-based, but again, not a healthy food there. So as long as you can, you're eating food that is in its whole form, like you recognize it growing in the garden there. That's a corn plant, that's a cucumber. You'll be okay. So it's the refined carbohydrates, but in their whole form, carbohydrates are what we are eating. Ask any gorilla, ask any buffalo, ask any elephant. Whole plant foods are carbohydrate rich, and they lead to a healthy mammalian body.
Thank you. So how about moving on to flexitarian? So what does this mean really? What do you see as some benefits or disadvantages to flexitarian style of eating?
Right. The flexitarian is, in their hearts, they feel they're largely a vegetarian. They're sympathetic with the idea of being plant-based, and most of their meals are predominantly plant-based, but they certainly allow themselves to eat some flesh when it's socially convenient or when they have a craving for it. Now, compared to what most Americans eat, a piece of animal flesh 3 times a day, the bacon and eggs for breakfast, the cheeseburger for lunch, the chicken for dinner, most Americans eat flesh 3 times a day. If the flexitarian wants to eat it twice a week, boy, that's much better, no question. And we would all benefit if everybody got their meat eating down to a little piece of flesh, meat eating down to a little piece of flesh twice a week. It'd be a much healthier world. But the problem is that, one, it keeps the slaughterhouses going. It keeps those poor animals in the factory farm sheds. And it's easy to let yourself off the hook. And then people go, oh, I'm flexitarian. But they really wind up, the amount of meat in their diet gets larger and larger. But while they're telling themselves, oh, I'm flexitarian, but it's easy to really swerve back into the standard American style of eating. And you're also kind of without a tribe there. The vegans, they on the Facebook pages, whatever, everybody knows what everybody else is talking about. The flexitarians, they may find themselves in another world there, not really comfortable with who is this person? Not that that's terribly important, but it has some social import to it. But it's still fueling the ecological destruction, the animal cruelty, and your microbiome down your gut's a little bit different when you drop that piece of flesh down in there than it would be if it was a pure plant-based food stream coming down there. And so I think it's more a way to soothe one's conscience rather than, but it's than purely a plant-based food stream. But again, twice a week is better than 3 times a day. So fair enough, but I wouldn't linger in there. I would make a choice. Which canoe are you in there? I think it's more important to decide eventually.
So a lot of patients come to me and they say, hey, Doc, I've cut down on red meat. And usually that's a step. And so I encourage them. I'm not all or nothing, but what is red meat, Dr. Klaper, and why is everyone only focusing on red meat? And what are some dangers of the other animal products that are still considered healthy for most people?
Really, it's quite remarkable. The red meat of these big mammals have a lot of myoglobin that contains iron in it, and hemoglobin, a lot of blood and muscle protein in the animal tissue there. So it looks, quote, red. It's mostly the blood of the animal in there. And it has all the issues with cholesterol and AGEs and all these things when you cook the meat, oxidized cholesterol, etc. The white meat is a bit of it's a physiologic parlor trick. The chicken flesh, these are not mammals, and the birds have a little less myoglobin, less iron in their muscles. And so when you kill the animal, the blood's still in there, and the problems of consuming it are basically identical: animal flesh, animal muscles, animal muscle. Physiologically and pathologically, there's not a big difference. And once it gets down in our gut there, it's mostly an appearance issue, but they both have the same problems when you put them in a human body not designed to digest them.
I've read some industry studies from the pork industry where they were concerned by the pale appearance of pork on the supermarket shelves because it's considered less appetizing. And they were thinking about how to, how to make some operational changes to protect, the appearance of that meat. This is a big deal for the industry, also with fish and how orange the salmon is and everything. So they're trying to optimize the color based on consumer expectations. And that means lots of additives. That means changing their slaughter practices, not in a way that benefits animals, but it's just in a way that sort of like, well, it's the timing, how stressed out can we make these animals in the line before they're slaughtered. They're very intent on figuring this out because it affects their bottom line. So don't get too caught up in the color of your animal products. I will say, if you open something and it's green, and it's supposed to be milk, or, maybe put that aside. Also on Flexitarian, a lot of people, we did a whole episode on Chef AJ on this topic, chicken and fish. So audience here is welcome to find that in YouTube. But just briefly, I mean, what are some issues with chicken and fish, which are very widely considered to be health foods?
Oh my. Well, as we said, broiling chicken muscle and broiling cow muscle are still going to give you the load of oxidized cholesterol and advanced glycation end products. And the animals in the factory farm system are fed the hormones to increase their growth weight, antibiotics, etc. Those all wind up in the flesh that you consume. The fish today are so polluted with mercury and pesticides and dioxin that is, I think, is toxic to consume that. And now the factory farm salmon are all filled with antibiotics and antifungals. They get infections. They're dosed with these powerful chemicals. The red lights are flashing everywhere. Stop eating the animals. It's just not healthy. And no matter what animal flesh you're trying to rationalize, there's a good reason not to be consuming it. We could spend the rest of the hour on what's really in fish flesh these days. But just it's not who we're supposed to be eating for sure.
We also did an episode on avian influenza or bird flu, so we were welcome to go explore that. But I'm still getting regular updates from the New York State Department of Health, because now I'm practicing in New York, and they are concerned about avian influenza. It's not going away. It's affecting dairy herds, and it's been found in milk in numerous states. There are several cases now of avian influenza being transmitted to human agricultural workers. So the big public health issue, and continuing to eat chicken is perpetuating the zoonotic infectious disease risks that could make COVID look like a silly little cold. So onwards to ketogenic diet. Dr. Klaper, why is it called the ketogenic diet?
Good question, and well answered that last one, Dr. Burns. You always come through like the shortstop who goes deep in the hole and with a powerful arm throws the guy out at first, and you come in with these great things I overlooked there. Great to have you on the team. The ketogenic diet. Again, here's another point where the American public seems to be so gullible and easy to, well, if a little is good, more must be better. That rationale, whether it's vitamins or the various other nutritional supplements. We are carbohydrate burning organisms. We burn sugars in our mitochondria. That is the preferred fuel. And we eat some carbohydrates, some starch in the corn and the beans, etc. The sugar goes in the bloodstream. We put a little insulin, move it into the sugars into our cells where they're burned in the mitochondria. That's how our physiology is meant to work on the carbohydrates we consume on a daily basis. But going way back 1 million years ago, as we were still evolving into our present form here, our ancient foraging ancestors who lived in groups of 20, 30, 40, they would spend all day. The most important thing is not starving to death, is finding enough calories. And they spent the days looking for calories. And I'm going to show you in a minute, digging up starches and tubers and finding berries and roots, etc. And that's where most of the calories came from, not from mammoth meat, etc. We'll talk about that in a minute. But nature being nature, it's not hard to conceive of our ancient foraging ancestors would run into 5, 6, 7 day stretches where there were no berries on the berry bushes. And it took days before they found the next tree with ripe fruit, the next animal carcass rotting in the sun, till they got some calories. And they just had to live hopefully on water alone for 5, 6 days at a time. And at that point, the body, when there's no more carbohydrates coming in, the body turns to burning its own stored fats. And fair enough, it's an emergency fuel. And when you burn fats, these acidic molecules called ketones show up in the bloodstream. And when ketones start showing up, the body goes into a state of slower metabolism, and it starts cleaning out its cells. In a process called autophagy, and it's a good thing, like spring cleaning, any scrap, oxidized starches and old DNA, whatever, throw it in the metabolic furnace, burn it for energy, and it cleans out the body. And we find this in a controlled medical fast at True North Health Center, a week spent in ketosis, where you're living off your stored fats and these ketones in the blood. It's a beneficial thing. Blood pressures come down, the microbiome changes. Good thing to be in ketosis for a week or two. If you're trying to get hold of inflammation, that settles down, etc. But Americans being Americans, somebody had to say, "Ooh, well, if 2 weeks in ketosis, fine. Well, how about a month? How about 2 months? Let's just stay in ketosis." And to do that means eating essentially no carbohydrates, just eating fats and protein. Well, there's problems with this body consuming a high-fat diet. There's no fiber in it, and so you're going to have problems down in the gut. There's no plant-based nutrients as far as vitamin C, vitamins A, vitamin K are missing. The saturated fats are certainly not friendly to the arteries. They are pro-inflammatory. You're going to have lots of inflammation throughout the body. Loading the liver up with fat meal after meal is a great way to give yourself a fatty liver. All the protein and the uric acid that's going to be spawned from that protein is going to give you kidney stones. All the acidic ketones are going to mean your bones are going to lose calcium. The thyroid hormone is interfered with its function when you're in the state of ketosis. You wonder, all this cooked meat smearing on the gut wall month after month, what kind of colon cancer you're going to be spawning. On every level, this is not a natural diet. And these folks who know, I felt great. Yeah, you initially need some honey and you may feel better, but to stay in ketosis for more than a couple of weeks, month after month, this is for me a diet of disaster. Is going to lead to artery disease and strokes, and leaky gut, autoimmune disease, colon cancer, kidney stones, fatty liver. This is not a healthy diet. And again, a little is good. Just keep it a little at a time spent in ketosis. Don't live in a ketotic state. It's just not healthy. And these folks, you get these early beneficial changes, but nobody's been on the ketotic diet for 10 years, or nobody knows what's going to happen if you do that. But in my opinion, nothing good is going to happen.
So help me understand this, because you worked at True North for years and you were supervising water-only fasts. And part of the benefits people derive from that experience is from the physiologic state of ketosis. So if ketosis is healthy in that sense, then why not a ketogenic diet?
Again, it's It's an emergency fuel. If you're driving on a highway and you come up to a car that's a little slow, you pull out in the passing lane, you put the gas down, and your engine hits passing gear, and you zoom past the car. Great, let's hear it for passing gear. But if you're in Miami, you don't want to drive to Seattle in passing gear. You will burn out the bearings of your car. It's an emergency fuel. And the same thing with the stored fats on our body. It's an emergency fuel, yeah, but it's a state of acidosis, and your liver's got to deal with those acids. Your kidneys, your bones have to deal with this. It's not a state you want to stay in any more than passing gear is a gear you want to drive in. It's an emergency fuel, and it's a stressful state on the body. And a little bit of stress, like working out in the gym, a little stress on your muscles is good, but you don't want to keep your muscles exhausted hour after hour after hour. You're going to hurt the machinery there. And the same thing with being in a state of ketosis. A little is good. Keep it as a little. More is not better.
The passing gear, I'm imagining the horse race, right? So the horse speeds up past its opponents, but as we said in track and field, the muscles die. You know, it can't sustain that for indefinitely, and so it will not win the race, right? And how do we define winning the race in this sense? Well, it's having a meaningful, long life that isn't riddled with chronic illness and disability. So if that's what we're going for, we want a diet that's sustainable. And what was I going to say about the horse? Yeah, so to paint the picture in horse terms, there we have it. And then what's the difference really between ketogenic and a paleo diet?
Well, these are going to, and the carnivore diet, they're basically the same in that it's going to keep you in a state of ketosis. These are all ketogenic diets, and they all are, again, raise your risk of blood vessel disease, heart attack, strokes, colon cancer, leaky gut, autoimmune disease, dementia, etc. And I just want to quickly talk about a main pitfall again, and it's a semantic one. The people who came up with this has this romantic idea of the ancient cavemen. They lived every Neanderthal had a mammoth in the freezer there and spent all day eating mammoth meat. Well, it's a myth. Most hunts were unsuccessful. The guys came back empty-handed most of the time. If they did drag a carcass into camp, there was no refrigeration. It rotted within days. And this idea that our ancient ancestors lived on animal flesh is simply a myth. So the question is, are we the carnivorous apes? Is that really who we are? And the paleo folks say, yes, eat flesh and yeah, maybe some grass that was growing around the mouth of the cave, but we're flesh eaters. Macho Man, the carnivore diet says, forget the grass at the front of the cave, just eat flesh. Avoid those carbs, man. Avoid those potatoes and grains and flour products. And people lose weight. And they say, oh, it's the best diet. So paleo diet is the best diet, right? Let's get flesh eating into some perspective here. Most Americans eat a piece of animal flesh every 4 hours, and every meal is a piece of animal flesh in the middle of the plate. If not, you call the waiter over and say, where's my protein? People, not even mountain lions, eat flesh 3 times a day. Tigers in the rainforest, official carnivores don't eat flesh 3 times a day. No advanced primate eats animal flesh 3 times a day. They sure don't feed their young animal flesh 3 times a day. And by anatomy and physiology, we've got basically the same digestive system that our gorilla cousins have, and they create these magnificent muscles. So can the human body, and these gorillas in the wild do not develop clogged arteries. They don't develop type 2 diabetes or colitis on a high carbohydrate diet. And neither of these magnificent primates requires animal flesh, yet we eat it 3 times a day. The metabolic reality is our mitochondria are glucose-seeking structures. We are carbohydrate-burning creatures. We still have long intestines like the herbivores. Our saliva contains enzyme to digest starches, if that's not a clue from the universe, what we're supposed to be eating. And those who want a more detailed exploration, I urge you to go to YouTube and see Dr. Milton Mill's excellent presentation, Is Man an Herbivore or Omnivore? He really goes into this in detail. Now, people will then point to our canine teeth and they say, aha, see, we got canine teeth. Why were we given these if we weren't supposed to be eating animal flesh? That's why I'm a flesh eater. I would point out, if you go in the bathroom, open your mouth, look at the mirror, you'll see that your canine teeth are shorter than your central incisors. That should be a big clue. If you want to see that these are not meant for tearing animal flesh, imagine jumping on the back of a buffalo, opening your mouth and taking a big bite out of its backside. What good would these canines do you that you couldn't bite through that animal's hide, let alone its muscle? This idea that we have canine teeth for eating animal flesh, I would say, look in the mirror. If you want to see some canine teeth, if your canines look like this, absolutely, you have a right to be eating animal flesh. Don't even bother cooking it. But these are real canine teeth designed for eating animal flesh, not what we were given here. And when we look at the fossilized fecal droppings, we see there are massive from the paleo folks. They're eating huge amounts of animal fiber. Huge amounts of plant fiber. Most of the calories brought into the Paleolithic camp were gathered by the women who knew what these mouths were made for. Our flat grinding molar teeth, our small mouths, and our rotary jaw joints that allow us to chew from side to side are perfectly engineered to where our calories really came from. And those were from the wild roots and tubers and legumes that, again, were mostly gathered by the women who spent all day gathering these carbohydrate-rich foods. This is where our calories came from. And we were starchivores back then. We're starchivores now. This is what these small mouths and short canine teeth were really designed to consume. Now people often, initially see some clinical improvements in their blood pressure and their lipids because the paleo folks say some things I agree with, that no caveman ever milked a dairy cow, so they're down on dairy. No caveman ever squeezed the fat out of olives and put it on its salad, so they're down on oils. And no caveman ever ground wheat into flour and made vegan donuts. So you eliminate the dairy and the oils and the flour from your diet, you're going to lose weight. And the weight loss alone is going to improve your lipids, improve a lot of things. But in my book, as I mentioned, this is a recipe. Packing your colon full of meat 3 times a day is a recipe for an epidemic of colon cancer. The blood vessels are going to decay and give heart attacks and strokes. Leaky gut will come from all the endotoxin they're eating. All the fat will clog insulin receptors, give them type 2 diabetes. They're going to spawn microbes in their gut that are going to give them Crohn's disease and colitis. And all the AGEs that are produced when you cook the meat damage the brain and blood vessels. The biggest, strongest animals on the planet do not eat meat: elephants, buffaloes, and giraffe, and we don't need either. Here's all these magnificent plant-based athletes. You don't have to eat a bull to be as strong as one. This is the natural diet for humans. A whole plant-based diet with lots of dark leafy greens. This will keep you out of the hospital and out of the clutches of people like Dr. Burns and myself. Okay, so we got to wrap it up here soon. But in my book, when we're talking about who wins the diet derby here, it's basically in this order. And I think a whole food plant-based diet with lots of dark leafy greens and minimum processed foods for taste enjoyment there is the safest, most beneficial dietary style. And Chef AJ knows how to make it taste delicious. So follow her guidance. Dr. Burns.
Indeed. Sure. Well, I'd love to open it up, and Chef AJ, if there are any questions. But one anecdote from yesterday is that I'm seeing a lot of patients in their 20s. They're usually guys, and they come in and say they have some fitness or weight loss goal, modest. I want to lose 15 pounds. I want to get buff, whatever. And they go on certain apps or they watch whatever videos, and this one patient came to the conclusion based on some app that he should consume approximately 190 grams of protein per day, mostly animal derived, and that he was doing a paleo style diet with that, and he had the idea that all carbohydrates were bad. So he was a really sweet kid in his 20s, and I commended him for prioritizing his health, but we had a lot of education to do. And he was receptive. He said, I had no idea that, for his size, he basically needed something more like 60 or 70 grams of protein per day. So he's having about 150% more protein than he needed, even by, like national nutrition recommendations. This is not from plant-based organizations, but people are way overdoing it with their protein and animal fat. So please, for people out there, caution about following these latter few diets. They're not long-term or even really short-term solutions. But Chef AJ, I'd love to hear any questions from the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous presentation, both of you. So we have quite a few, and we also have ones that are sent in, but I'll jump over to Instagram first, where I see a question about menopausal women trying to lose weight. Vegans Alliance, nice username, says, I hardly eat junk food and almost cut the fats out, and I'm still not losing weight. I wonder what hardly is. Hardly. How many times a week is hardly?
This is a common issue, and Mother Nature has, she's got some blueprints in our genes here that women, as they get into their later years, their hormones change, absorption of nutrients change, liver physiology change. They want women, if you will, and pardon if this is sounds strange, the grandmothers have an important role in the tribe, and you want them healthy and stocky and living a long time, and reproduction and sexual seductiveness recede. That's not the purpose of a 70-year-old woman. She needs to be healthy and present for the grandchildren and to pass on the wisdom. And so for her to try and get that 20-year-old body back again may not be realistic as long as it's a healthy 70-year-old body. That said, if you're really trying to lose the weight, then here's a place where a brief, say, a water or vegetable broth fast for 3 to 5 days for starters, and then for a good 2 weeks to 2 to 5 weeks, basically raw foods and steamed vegetables, soups and salads and steamed veggies. Stop the rice, beans, grains, and certainly flour products. And you're trying to shift metabolic gears here. So a good month on really low starch, high fiber, high water content plant foods will shift metabolism in your liver and your gut as well. But it's not an easy thing to do. But if you really want to break through, that's that would be the strategy, because the flour products and any processed food, hidden oils, those are going to keep you stuck when you're in that 70-year-old female body.
Thank you. And another question from Instagram from Patty's Pitties is, I just got diagnosed with long COVID AFib. Any suggestions?
Oh my, those are two issues: long COVID and atrial fibrillation. And oh man. Long COVID, again, a similar thing. I'm certainly no expert in that, and there are doctors who deal with long COVID, et cetera. A brief fast and a really low-fat diet would probably help. I can't make any promises that I've not researched that. As far as atrial fibrillation goes, you got to be really gentle with the pacemaker cells in your right atrium that are a little upset and throwing out all these extra beats there. Again, similar phenomenon. You want to change the blood flow in the tiny little vessels going to to those heart muscle cells. A diet really rich in magnesium and stabilizing nutrients like the carotenoids. So lots of green vegetables, lots of yellow vegetables. If you have to ask, I found it successful. I've got a number of vegan patients with intermittent bouts of atrial fibrillation. They're not in it all the time. If you're in it all the time, you need to be under the care of a cardiologist. But I've got a couple of patients, I give them a prescription for metoprolol. Some people pronounce it metoprolol, 100 milligrams. And so just keep it by your bedside. If you find yourself in an episode of thumpity thump, take one and go lay down and take a nap. You'll probably, when you get up, it'll be gone. And just use those once a month, twice a month if you have bouts like this, rather than staying on it forever, which the cardiologist will tell you need to be. Just use it on an as-needed basis. I find that's effective. But clean up your diet to the greatest extent possible. Eat those magnesium and calcium-rich foods.
A
Perfect.
couple points to add is that long COVID, remember, ultimately it's an inflammatory situation, so that there's some autoimmune dysregulation, the immune system. So anything you can do, basic stuff that we always recommend to bolster the immune system for the present and the future, is really beneficial. So it's gentle exercise, that's a whole plant food diet to minimize inflammation so that the immune system can be recalibrated, because it's such a fine calibration. When it's overactive, that's autoimmune disease. When it's underactive, you're immunosuppressed. So, it's this amazing, intricate system. You need it right in the middle, balanced, and you can do that to a large extent, barring any, like organic complications. If you really have some immune deficiency or an autoimmune condition, you can do a lot to promote that through diet. And then with AFib, I'm not very familiar with the association between long COVID and atrial fibrillation, but regardless, even if you had long COVID and that's when your AFib started, you would want to get a workup. You need to see, you got to make sure that the AFib is not a product of coronary artery disease, right? Because often it is. So you need to see a cardiologist and get to the bottom of it, rule out different pathologies that could cause the AFib, and then go from there and see what you can do that's within your control.
Thank you. Okay, I have a question that was sent in advance to Heidi, and it is, should whole food plant-based eaters be concerned with counting oxalates in our food? Daily, I have a raw beet in my salad, and I eat fennel and potatoes and sweet potatoes, all having oxalates. Even quinoa and oats have oxalates.
There was someone at the Plantation Project conference recently, I forget who it was, but she was really frustrated about the oxalate question, because she felt like people are so fixated on it, and for good reason. There's a lot of information out there, and so thank you for your question, and it's an important concern, but I'm not particularly worried about oxalates. If you have a balanced plant-based diet, it's really hard to overdo it with oxalates. If you have nephrolithiasis or kidney stones, then, and that's something you deal with and really plagues you, because kidney stones can be terrible, then you have to get a little sharper. You might want to consider your oxalate consumption. But remember, the big thing to prevent the common types of kidney stones is to reduce sodium in the diet. Otherwise, if you're not dealing with kidney stones or anything like this, then I don't usually recommend counting oxalates or being particularly concerned with oxalates at all. Dr. Klaper, anything you'd add there?
Right, I agree with you, Dr. Burns. The vast majority of oxalates that are winding up in the urine are created in your own body by your own Krebs cycle metabolism, and the amount of dietary oxalates is a small fraction of that. It doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of difference as far as if you're a stone former. That's coming from inside, from your own oxalate production, and not the oxalates in the diet there. So if you're a stone former, as I said, cut down the sodium in the diet, increase the potassium in the diet, and drink enough water so the oxalates don't get a high enough concentration to crystallize out there. But dietary oxalates, and I wouldn't eat 2 pounds of beet greens every day, but don't be afraid of the occasional of a scoop of quinoa in your salad or some beets in your soup. I think it's fine.
Great, thank you. And then she had another question that she heard that eating more than 40 grams of healthy whole food plant-based fiber a day is not the healthiest for the gut of a long-time whole food plant-based eater, not a beginner. And Dr. Greger suggests aiming for 100 grams of fiber for health. What do you think?
40 grams is most Americans eat like 5 or 8 or 10 grams of fiber a day, and the paleo folks whose fossilized feces I showed you, they were eating around 80 to 100 grams a day. That all there was whole plant foods back then. If in today's modern world you can get 40 or 50 grams of fiber and have a big salad every day, have a plate of steamed greens, have vegetable soup, have whole grains, etc. You'll get your 30, 40 grams of fiber, and that's a reasonable amount. You'll pass these big soft stools and be healthy for it. 40 grams is an absolutely reasonable amount of fiber to look for.
Thank you.
Remember,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
one quick piece is that, remember, for everyone listening, fiber is what we call prebiotics. It's not probiotics. Prebiotics, because those are the foods that go down into the GI tract and recruit bacteria to digest them. So that is our healthy gut microbiome. So when we eat diverse fibrous foods, then we build our, as Dr. B says, the other Dr. B, we cultivate your inner rainforest. So you want to have fiber. I don't usually recommend people to count their grams of fiber. If you're having a whole plant food diet, you're going to get plenty.
Right. Yeah. Now that I think of it, you are Dr. B, Dr. Burns.
Mhm.
Oh, you have to leave in 5 minutes. Okay. You can leave now if you want, or we can save these questions for next time.
We got 5 more minutes, and I've got
Okay, great. Well, then I'll ask this one. Thank you. From Tracy. And she says, are there any specific foods I should focus on that will help keep palindromic rheumatism from flaring up? It was not an experience I enjoyed, and I don't want to repeat it. I'm willing to do whatever I can to prevent it from happening again.
Man, these rheumatic diseases they're the bane of most nutritional doctors. This is someone who would probably benefit from either a prolonged fast at a place like True North or short intermittent fasting. I've got patients with these kind of diseases. Every other weekend, they'll do a 3-day fast from Friday to Monday on vegetable broth or water. And that really goes a long way towards keeping things in control. And during the week, again, high carbohydrate breads and pastas are not the friends of these folks. They want to be eating whole plant foods, underlying whole. So avoid flour products and intermittent fasting would probably be a good idea. Lots of omega-3, lots of chia seeds, hemp seeds, etc., for the anti-inflammatory properties.
Right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Dr. Burns. Thank you, Dr. Klaper.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, it's
Thanks for having me.
always so much fun. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back next Wednesday, October 9th at 9 a.m. Pacific time for another fabulous plant-based doctor, Dr. Alan Goldhammer, and he can talk to you all about fasting.